and Charleston Shared Future have for the past 4 years provided nonpartisan panel discussions and grassroots convenings on school board issues and attributes, all for the purpose of encouraging more qualified individuals to run and assisting an informed electorate to choose wisely. You can find out more about their work at thecharlestonforum.com and lwv.org. Now let's get to it. We have an experienced panel, a really impressive group to engage these topics, and they have seen at least some of the questions that we'll pose to them this evening. The rest will come from you and from our moderator, who I will introduce to you now. She's well known in this region, and we're fortunate to have Dr. Kendra Stewart in the chair to introduce our panel and facilitate a provocative exchange. Dr. Stewart is Executive Director of the Joseph P. Riley Jr. Center for Livable Communities and a tenured professor at the College of Charleston. She has served on multiple national and local nonprofit boards and is a frequent guest as a political analyst on local and national broadcast and in print. Dr. Stewart.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us. Thank you, John, for the kind introduction. I am very honored to have the opportunity to be part of such an important event and to share this virtual stage with some very impressive and esteemed panelists who I will introduce in just a minute. As a political science professor and director of a center that focuses on livability, I cannot stress enough the significance on a society of equitable access to high quality education. And school boards serve as really touchstones of democracy, allowing citizens the opportunity to influence how education is delivered in our communities. In recent years, school boards have had to make very difficult and controversial decisions in times of extreme uncertainty. They've also been hotbeds of political activity like nothing we have seen before, and have been receiving unprecedented attention. Tonight, we are going to begin a conversation, as John mentioned, that will hopefully continue through the fall on the importance of serving on a school board. So this evening, just a couple of logistics. The audience will remain on mute, but we encourage you to put questions in the chat box. After a series of questions are answered by our panelists, we will turn to audience questions. So please participate. Also, as you may have heard, the discussion tonight will be recorded and made available, and we'll share more information on that. A reminder to our panelists, the discussion is supposed to be apolitical and impersonal. And that is, of course, something that is really important as we try to get to the issues that can often be political issues. The way we are going to operate this evening is we will have, after I introduce each of the panelists, we'll go around and have 2-minute opening statements. Following that, I will read a question and direct it towards one panelist, while others then will have an opportunity to respond for about 90 seconds. We are hoping there'll be lots of great conversation amongst the panelists for each of these questions. And after going through this series of prepared questions, we will open it again for audience questions. So now I will introduce each of our panelists. Beginning with Reverend Eric Manning. The Reverend Eric Manning is the husband of Andretta Manning and is the proud father of Ashley and Eric II. Reverend Manning holds a Bachelor of Arts in History from Excelsior College and a Master of Divinity degree from Erskine Theological Seminary, where he is currently pursuing a Doctor of Ministry. Reverend Manning served honorably in the U.S. Army and military intelligence and has had a successful career in information technology, culminating at Hewlett-Packard Enterprises before transitioning full-time into pastoral ministry in 2004. Reverend Manning has served as a pastor at a number of AME churches throughout South Carolina, including Welch Chapel AME in Timmonsville, Trinity AME in Pamplico, St. Paul AME in Effingham, and Historical Bethel AME in Georgetown. In 2016, Reverend Manning was assigned to Mother Emanuel AME Church in Charleston as the senior pastor. In this capacity, Reverend Manning has led the congregation on a journey of healing, recovery, and restoration. Through his work here, he has established the Mother Emanuel Empowerment Center. He currently serves as co-chair of the Mother Emanuel Memorial Foundation, chairman of the historical Mother Emanuel AMEC Foundation, and he continues to provide key leadership in the community by serving on several boards and lending his voice to speak out against hatred, racism, bigotry, gun violence, educational inadequacies, and injustices that impact so many in our community, state, country, and the world. Good evening, Reverend Manning. Next, we have Mr. Scott Price. Scott Price is the Executive Director for the South Carolina School Boards Association. Prior to joining the association in 1996 as a general counsel and chief lobbyist, Mr. Price was an associate with the Columbia law firm of Tompkins and McMaster. He received a law degree from the University of South Carolina School of Law and a Bachelor of Arts degree from USC's College of Journalism. Mr. Price is a former newspaper reporter who has worked at daily and weekly newspapers in both North and South Carolina. He was named executive director of the South Carolina School Boards Association in 2015. Good evening, Mr. Price. Next, we have Kathy Schwalbe. Kathy Schwalbe is a veteran educator of almost 44 years. She received initial educator preparation at the University of South Carolina and a master's in curriculum and instruction at the Citadel. Ms. Schwalbe served as an English language arts and journalism teacher at middle and secondary levels for 19 years and was one of the first teachers in South Carolina to achieve the certification with the National Board for Professional Teaching Standards. Following her time as a classroom teacher and department lead, she became a program director for SARA, an experience that lit her passions for mentoring and leadership. She became an associate trainer for Cognitive Coaching SM and conducted training seminars for teachers, mentors, principals, and district leaders. Ms. Schwalbe also served as director of the Office of Student Services and Certification in the School of Education at the College of Charleston. During that time, she was elected to serve on the Berkeley County School Board for 2 terms, serving as secretary, vice chair, and chair during her service. Most recently, Ms. Schwalbe supported the launch of the Carolina Collaborative for Alternative Preparation in the College of Education at the University of South Carolina and served as the coaching coordinator. She is married to Herman, and they have 2 daughters and 4 amazing grandchildren. And finally, last but not least, we have Letitia Vaughn. Letitia Vaughn is an education revolutionary who has exhibited innovation at the classroom level, as a principal, and at the district level over her 30-year career. Ms. Vaughn has coached leaders and strengthened educational systems in the Midwest, Southwest, and East Coast through Letitia Nicole LLC. As the founding partner and chief programs officer for E3 Educate, Empower, Elevate Foundation, Ms. Vaughn leads the advocacy, co-creation, and workforce programmatic areas for the organization. With a foundational grounding in listening to and acting on the voices of the most impacted by the systemic issues facing marginalized communities. Prior to E3, Ms. Vaughn was the Chief Operating Officer for the Tri-County Cradle to Career Collaborative, where she oversaw strategy and primary leadership for the kindergarten readiness and high school graduation networks. She serves simultaneously as the Director of Education Initiatives with the Charleston Promise Neighborhood and as the Assistant Associate Superintendent with Charleston County School District. Ms. Vaughn has also served on several nonprofit boards, including the Board of Directors for Teach for America South Carolina. She has been awarded the YWCA's What Women Bring Award, which recognizes women leaders breaking industry barriers in South Carolina. Ms. Vaughn has a bachelor's degree in accounting from the University of Missouri, a BA in elementary education from Park College, and a Master of Educational Leadership from Georgia State University. So again, welcome to each of our panelists, and we will begin with Reverend Manning for a 2-minute opening statement.
Well, again, let me thank the League of Women Voters for this opportunity to share, and for everyone, all of the distinguished panels. As I was listening to everyone's background, I think this is a wonderful opportunity to have a meaningful discussion, of course, regarding the importance of education and the importance of school board elections. Everything that we do, of course, always matters, and we always must remember that at the core of all of our decisions should be the well-being of the next generation, our children, our youth, and we need to make sure that we always have them at the foremost part of our mind. Of course, I am married to an educator, and by default, and involved in education, and then as well being being the pastor of Mother Emanuel, we always are doing our very best to be a part of what is meaningful and important within our community. So again, I am immensely grateful and thankful for the opportunity, and I'm looking forward to having a meaningful discussion regarding the school board elections and what we must do to make sure that we are putting our best foot forward for our children. So again, thank you so very much.
Thank you. Mr. Price.
Good evening. I'd like to thank everybody for this opportunity to talk to you this evening. My name is Scott Price. I'm the Executive Director for the South Carolina School Boards Association, and we're a nonprofit entity. Every state has a school boards association, and we focus 100% on school board members. And that includes a number of services from professional development and training to legal services, policy services, communication services, referendum, superintendent search services, and legislative services, most importantly, legislative services. But, serving as an effective school board member today requires great amounts of time, sincere interest in public education, and a commitment to improving learning for all children, which is sort of at the basis of everything that we provide for school board members. It is such an important job, and it's the elected position, I think, where the rubber really meets the road. And as Dr. Stewart pointed out, and it's a tough job in the first place, but in the past couple of years, it's been even tougher. And so it's so important that you people who are watching this pay attention to your school boards and pay attention to your school board elections, and maybe position yourself at some point, if you have an interest, to run for school board. And we'll talk a little bit more about what it takes to be a school board member, at least in various opinions that are joining us this evening. And it's like I said, it's one where the true focus is and basically on one thing only, and that is to make sure to have the best academic programs that we can have for the students of South Carolina. There's a whole lot more that goes around that, but that's really at the basis of the reason for being on a school board. So again, I want to thank you for your interest. I thank you for the opportunity to be a part of this very important discussion, and look forward to any sort of future follow-up from that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Price. Ms. Schwalbe?
Yes, good evening, everyone. What a large group. This is awesome to be here, and I too appreciate the invitation to have this discussion with all of the panelists around our school boards. I did serve on Berkeley County School Board, finished my second term 8 years ago. I cannot believe it, but it has already been 8 years. I will tell you, and I'm not joking, that I'm still processing those 8 years of serving on that board with the various members that I came to know so well in some very challenging times, with one of the steepest learning curves I've ever experienced. I am still deeply involved in education, as you heard already. Have informally retired a few times now. But I wake up every day with two daughters who are educators and four grandchildren. Our oldest just graduated from high school. And just as when I was on the board, those family members, my nearest and dearest, keep my feet firmly planted in the challenges that classroom teachers and our administrators face. And I would not be fair if I did not also say how much I worry and am concerned about the challenges that parents face that I did not experience myself. It is great to be here, and I'm looking forward to lots more discussion and hope I can shed some light that may encourage someone to run for a school board seat. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And finally, Ms. Vaughn.
Thank you so much. I echo my fellow panelists. Just appreciate the opportunity to be here this afternoon. I am Letitia Vaughn, one of the co-founders of E3 Foundation, whose focus is to connect people to systems in the South. And Kendra, Dr. Stewart read that long bio, but one of the things that was left out is that I am a parent. I'm the parent of two children who participated in education and are still participating in education in two of our local school districts. And so I'm glad to be last, even though I don't want to be last. But I think for me, it is the urgency of what needs to happen with our schools and the role that the school board plays in that. And I just want to set some context that although we've seen some semblance of progress in our local school districts, we have a lot of work to do. In our surrounding school districts, we have just over 50% of our fourth grade students scoring on grade level in reading in Charleston and DD2, and actually less than 50% in Berkeley and Dorchester County. And when we disaggregate that data, there are still large gaps in achievement between white students and other historically marginalized students, and even lower scores in math. In the state of South Carolina, only 12% of the teachers are of color, when almost 50% of the students are of color. When teachers are still not making livable wages despite the recent wage increases in one of our local school districts. And we're in a state where we are currently fighting to ensure our children have access to transparent and accurate history, because most recently, we did not receive funding for the AP African American History course in our state. And so there is a huge sense of urgency. So I'm very excited to be here this evening to help with this conversation.
Thank you very much, Ms. Vaughn. We're going to start with a question for Mr. Price. 3 of the 4 districts in the Low Country either have or are in the process of moving to single member district elections versus school district-wide representation. Why this change? What are the implications, positive and negative, for district governance? And could you also perhaps explain what the difference is or what it means to have a single member district?
Sure. Well, I thought that Ms. Vaughn said she wanted to go first, but I'll go ahead. I'll handle that one. Yeah, so thank you for that question. And I'm going to be speaking, I know this is a tri-county effort, but I'm going to be speaking generally in my comments relating to school boards. And this particular question, single member districts basically are where a school district is divided up into election districts, and members of the school board are elected to represent a certain area of the school district. When you have an at-large system, basically you have a slate of candidates that are elected to represent the district as a whole. And in South Carolina, we have, of course, 73 school districts. There's been a lot of consolidation over the past few years. So we do have 73 school districts and 73 school boards. 33 of those districts choose their school board members in a single member districts. 16 districts retain at-large representation, and 19 districts use a combination of single member and at large. What I think people really need to know about whether a district is school boards are elected at large or single member in a school district is that in South Carolina, there's no statewide law or regulation that sets forth how school boards are to be elected. Oh, being told to stop.
I think you can finish this.
Okay. School boards are basically the way they're elected, whether it's at large, single member. A lot of the governance structure is really set up by the local legislative delegation. And it's kind of, as I just said, it varies from district to district. There could be any number of reasons why a school district is set up as at large or single member or a combination. Sometimes it's completely political. Sometimes it's an effort to make sure that there is adequate minority representation on the local school board. And that in that case, it's better to be at a single member setup if you want to make sure that you have adequate representation of all the various diversity elements in the community. But really, it's not, from our standpoint, it's really not a one size fits all in terms of whether a board is at large or is set up in election districts or single member districts. And some of the advantages of single member is that you're going to have more of a local representation, and you're going to have people who are going to be representing a specific community. But sometimes, on the other hand, that's not a good thing, because when you focus on your community that you're representing, you may not see the bigger picture and have a focus on the entire district, school district, and the other kids that are out there. So that's one pro and con. And it's also not common. I noticed in the Tri-County area, it's not uncommon in a lot of districts that are countywide districts are set up, the school boards are basically set up to mirror the way county council is set up and the way the lines are drawn for county council. That's not uncommon either. But, I think that one of the things too is when you have single member representation, folks feel like they have their person on the board. You're going to have more familiarity as a candidate with your constituents. You're going to see them in church. You're going to see them at the grocery stores and that sort of thing. You're going to probably tend to have less of that with the at-large setup, and you might have candidates that are running that don't interact with larger parts of the district through the election process. So, I mean, that's kind of an overall pro and con of that.
Thank you.
Single member district versus at large, and I'll be glad to expound on anything, or if anybody has, any of the panelists want to ask me a specific question related to that.
Sure. And I'm going to ask if any of the panelists would like to respond, if they would raise their hand so I could call on them, regarding the implications of this change to single member district. All right. It looks like, I'm sorry, Reverend Manning.
Well, since no one was going to ask the question, I guess I'm going to lean into it realistically, because as I was taking the notes and listening to Mr. Price, I think it's something that's very important that we must always consider, right? In several of the dialogues that we have in certain instances, and I've listened to both the pros and the cons of both a single member district versus at large. And I'm wondering that if at times, if we have a at large representation, does that give us, I realize that there'll be challenges. But does that give us an opportunity to then begin to see how every student can be impacted by one change, right? What may be good in one situation may not be good for the greater good. Is that something that we that we are aware of, and then, of course, that we can do our best to combat.
I think that I think that at large, probably you're going to have a board that is going to be focused on a district as a whole and having an interest in what's going on at, high school across a particular program that might be having some success across the district and able to replicate that in other areas. And it's not a situation of where you have a single member set up where folks are really just focused on what's going on in their district and maybe not paying attention to what's going on in the other schools. And that's one of the things that we tell school board members is, by law, you have a responsibility to visit the schools within the district. And when you're in a single member setting, you need to make sure that you're visiting all the schools in the district so that you can see the things that are going on that you might want to bring back to the district the election district that you represent. So that's a good, valid point there, Pastor Manning. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to chime in? Okay, great. I'm going to direct it.
Could I add one thing to that,
Sure.
though? Because one of the things I think it's important too is when you're looking at a situation where you're trying to attract people to run for school board, I think again, getting back to the pros and cons, when you're in an at-large situation, it's probably going to cost a little bit more to try and run a campaign where you're canvassing basically the whole district. So that might preclude some people who might normally look at it, running in a school board race because of the increased cost from a practical standpoint of running a district-wide campaign, as opposed to one where you're running in a single member district that you represent. So that's just another point to make.
Thank you. And a great transition to the next question that I'm going to direct to Ms. Schwalbe about what are the attributes of an effective school board member and an effective school board?
Well, I think the most important attribute is to piggyback off of what Scott was just sharing, is this notion that when you take that oath, you really are representing all families in all communities in that school district, regardless of your district. I happen to be in a single district, and I happen to be in that most urban part of Berkeley County. Even though I taught in the district for a number of years and was very familiar with schools, until I decided to run for school board, I really had not gotten deeply into the communities as I felt I needed to once I started getting serious about this. So being collaborative, let me just start going down my list here. Listening more than you speak. Not having a next election on your brain when you are supposed to be focusing on children and families and educators. I mentioned earlier that I served pre-COVID. And when I think about the challenges now, and I often put myself in the seat of some of our local school districts because I still work very hard to stay informed. I try to think about what I would do if I were now heading to a meeting to deal with some of these issues. But the attributes are the same. Being a team member, knowing you're not going to win every argument, knowing that there really are not any arguments any of us need to win other than those that benefit children, and truly listening when people are speaking. Those board members that struggled the most during my term had very fixed mindsets, and they had very particular reasons for being there. And I will admit, it could be very frustrating at times, especially as an educator who knew I had to find balance in the classroom. And I leaned on that experience actually to work with my fellow board members.
Thank you. Would others like to chime in? Mr. Price? Oh, sorry. Did you, Ms. Vaughn? I think you, Ms. Vaughn and then Mr. Price.
Sorry, I couldn't find the raise my hand button. So I agree with everything that Dr. Schwabe said. I would also add, especially in this current climate, transparency and honesty. We've got to restore the public's trust in our
Yeah.
school boards and public schools. I agree with the willingness to work with other board members and being open and flexible. And also for our school board members to be learners themselves. Like
Right.
coming onto a school board, there's going to be a huge learning curve. If you have not been involved in any kind of education system, you've got to learn the education piece. If you have never managed people, the school board is responsible for managing a superintendent. So you have to understand HR policies and practices. If you have never managed a budget, school districts are multi-million-dollar businesses. And so there's a lot of learning that happens when you come onto a school board. And so you have to be willing to learn. You have to be willing to listen to experts because you are not the expert in the room on all things. I just think, what we've seen these last couple of years, you've got to be able to follow your own policies, know and learn Robert's Rules of Order. Just practical, tactical things that are imperative for an effective meeting to run. So I would add those things to Dr. Schwabe's answer.
Thank you. Mr. Price?
Well, I think Letitia stole all of my thunder. Yeah, I think that one of the things that she said that I was going to really underscore is you come on a board sometimes with an agenda, and you need to understand that you're just one vote if you got a 9-member board. If you want to get something done, you've got to somehow get 4 other people to go along with you in order to be able to accomplish anything. And there is a huge learning curve. State law doesn't require professional development and mandatory training other than when you are a newly elected school board member. You have 1 year from the date of election to go through an orientation session, and we at the association do provide that. And it covers, the statutory requirements of, finance, ethical training, roles and responsibilities. It covers Freedom of Information Act, and there's a whole section on, I mentioned finance, and other things, but that's one day. And back in the old days, when school board members were elected, and Kathy, you can back me up on this or not, if they came in there feeling like they knew everything, usually within a year they would get it and become part of and realize that they've got to work together in order to get something accomplished. I think we're seeing a kind of a move away from that, not only on school boards, but nationally. So it's very important to stay engaged as a school board member and continue with professional development and learning more about the district and about the statewide rules and regulations that applies, as well as the federal laws and regulations that apply, because you're sending people to Washington and to Columbia who know nothing about education. And so it's up to you as a school board member to make sure they understand what they do and how that implicates at the local level.
Thank you. Reverend Manning, what would you like to add?
Yeah, I would kind of, I think, echo what everyone has already articulated. And then, of course, just a couple of things, that willingness to serve, right? And the whole aspect of the willingness to serve means that not just a small contingent, right? Not the people who you may be familiar with, but everyone. And I think that's something that we lack in this current setting, right? Everyone is in their various silos. They do what they want to do. They will look out for their own personal interests, but they don't look out for the interests of others. I'm always reminded, and you have a pastor on, so a pastor is going to invoke scripture, right? What we do for the least of these will always matter. And I think that's the whole aspect. We need to make sure that we remember the least of these. And then as well, I love what Dr. Schwabe said. We don't need to necessarily become career school board members, right? We have to do the right thing. And if that means you lose for standing up for what is correct, then so be it. And I think that's something where even in our current politics, I'm sorry, we're apolitical, but we just keep thinking, how do I, stay in leadership? But we don't need to do that. We need to really, realistically, as the panelists have already articulated, be very cognizant and make sure that what we are doing is A, learning, B, growing, and C, learning how to move the advancement for all people of our respective districts. I'm stopping. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. I want to see if Dr. Schwabe would like to respond to any of this. Oh,
Yeah, I mean, as I was listening just now, I thought about how important it was for me to keep my mindset around diffusing situations. And again, as an educator, that's what I did with high school students. I loved teaching English, but sometimes they demanded that I diffuse situations. And I literally can go back now and think about times where parents were at the breaking point and their last resort was to call their school board member. And I could have very easily sent a text to that superintendent and said, tag, you're it. I'm not I'm not cut out of that cloth. And I'm very proud of the fact that some of them I had to talk back from the edge. Some of them I had to meet for a cup of coffee when I didn't have time, to do that like anyone else. And so this whole notion of service means that we always have opportunities to teach. And that was most rewarding. And I found that once parents understood that's what they were going to get when they reached out to me, I did have parents from all over the district and not just those in my area, because we got results that way. I helped them build bridges with a principal or with an SRO in a school or whatever it took. And I was that learner who found out pretty quickly that people are people and they want to be heard. They want to know their children are being loved and cared for. And I had to get over myself some days around that, because the easy way is to pass it off. So again, I'm long-winded. You're going to need more signs. I'm sorry, Ms. Cabot.
Thank you. No, this was all great insight for our listeners as to what to be looking for in the upcoming election. Next, I would like to ask Ms. Vaughn, who I know already addressed some of this in her opening statement. What do you believe to be the most important issues that should occupy a school board's time and attention in our region?
Yep. So I think a couple of things. You heard in my opening statement the kind of status of our schools, not only in our region, but across the state. Our schools are just not in mass producing highly competitive students who can fill our current vacancies. And when we look at even the jobs that are filled in our region in particular, we see a wage gap and a race gap between who the high earners are and who the high earners are not. And so I think, on the front end, I think it's really important that our school board must believe in the ability of all children to achieve at high levels. Our school board must actually believe that all children deserve what they want for their own children. And that's not something that I can, say right now. School board members have to be courageous enough to examine their own existing belief systems. And we talked about being an advocate for all children, not just your district's children. So our school board their role is to manage the leader that they hire, to make sure that the leader that they hire is doing the job that that person is supposed to do. And so our school board has to work in partnership with our districts to support the leader, yet hold them accountable for results and innovation. That's it. I saw the stop.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm assuming almost everybody would want to respond to this one as well. Dr. Schwalbe, I see you're already unmuted, so I'll have you go next.
I have quite the list, but I'll mention two things. We absolutely have to figure out how to stabilize leadership in the superintendency and in all of those key positions at the district level, as much as a school board member can influence that. Parents want stable schools. They know they're not perfect. They know their children are not perfect. They want stability. They want communication. The other issue that seems to be really flying up in my face more and more often is this one-sided contract we have for our teachers. It is demoralizing. It is not holding our teachers up as professionals who have the ultimate responsibility of caring for other people's children. And I can still see that half pager that I would sign every year gleefully because I was so excited to be back. Didn't have any reason to think I wouldn't be, but I will not lie. There were times that I felt that the district was protected in every way possible. I was not. Especially at a high school where things can be volatile. I think at the time when I was teaching at Stratford, we were the third largest high school in the state. We were the largest gathering of human beings in Berkeley County every day. Things happen, and I saw things happen, and I worried about our teachers. We were a tight group, as tight as we could be. But that contract really reminds teachers that the district is being protected. And so if I were still on a school board right now, that would be the drum I would be beating right now, because it would have an impact on everything else. If we can lift up our teachers and principals, they are going to be more innovative and creative. They're going to reach out to parents and support parents in what they want for their children. And I really do. It sort of begins there for me.
Thank you. Reverend Manning, would you like to chime in on what you believe to be some of the most important issues for a school board member?
Sure. Well, I heard what Ms. Vaughn has already articulated and Dr. Schwalbe as well. I think realistically, going back to what Ms. Vaughn had already said in her opening statement regarding just the sheer numbers, right? Paying very close attention to the numbers. And when I say numbers, I'm not talking about, how many people are showing up to vote or anything like that. I'm looking at those who are reading on grade level, those who are not. And the school board members need to be mindful of where our children are. Again, I'm looking at the totality of the district. And figure out meaningful ways to make sure that all children are able to get to grade level and then, of course, to excel. I think that's something that's very important because realistically speaking, again, come right back to what I said before a few moments ago, what we do for the least of these. So I think if we have a school board who is very, I guess, following and making sure that they are concerned about all members, all the school children, and where those inadequacies fall. I think that's something that's very important. I won't get into teachers' contracts, as Dr. Schwabe was already articulating, but I think that's something very important as well. Teachers have to continue to be empowered, and we have to look for ways to do that.
Thank you. Mr. Price?
Thank you. And I would like to incorporate basically what the other panelists have said. Obviously, important issues that need to occupy school board members' focus would be certainly student academic achievement. And talking what Dr. Schwabe said, making sure, because we have a huge teacher shortage, not only nationally, but in South Carolina, every district is experiencing a huge teacher shortage. And, the General Assembly has been looking at ways to address that, certainly with pay increases. And it has been a focus legislatively for the past couple of years. Got a long way to go and a lot more to do. And that does include looking at ways to make sure that we are shoring up the professionalism that applies to being a teacher. And because not only do we need to attract them to be teachers, but we need to retain them once they're there. And there are contractual issues that are tied to that. School leadership and focusing on, as a board, making sure that we have top leadership, not only in the district office, but at the school level. Because again, that goes a long way to building and strengthening the retention issue that we have out there. And I would talk, interestingly enough, school bus drivers, there's another issue of, we got to get kids to school. And there is a huge shortage of school bus drivers in South Carolina. And we have to look at ways to make sure that we can entice folks into doing those. Those are important things.
Thank you. Ms. Vaughn, would you like to add anything else before we move on?
I did. So I just want to say that major systems changes need to occur for our schools to be adequately able to serve all children. And when we talk about systems change, we're talking about shifts in policies, practices, resources, and mindsets. And so the role of our school boards needs to be to create the conditions for those changes to occur, which means, how does the school board put policies in place to reduce barriers so that leaders can lead and transformational changes can occur? Dr. Schwabe talked about the turnover. Well, the turnover is the turnover because the conditions for school district leaders and employees creates the condition that nobody stays over a certain amount of time. And so I just think if school boards could think about how they create the conditions so that transformation can occur, we could be in a different place.
Thank you. Reverend Manning, did you want to add something before I was?
Yeah, just quickly as well, as Ms. Vaughn was articulating, one of the things that we also need to be mindful of, and I didn't hear any of the panelists talk about it yet, which is dealing with the disciplinary issues, right, that creep up. A lot of times there are certain things that teachers are exposed to that will happen in school and classrooms, and school board members need to be not necessarily reactive, proactive, but not always looking at ways to just dismiss a student, but look at the root cause and try to figure out how they can better assist and be part of the solution and not necessarily part of a systemic problem, going back to Ms. Vaughn's point.
Thank you. Mr. Price, did you have your hand up to comment on this one as well?
Yeah, I do, if that's okay. I would just encourage you all to think too that, so, school boards and districts and public education is probably one of the most heavily regulated entities out there, from the federal level all the way to the state level, in terms of, statutes and requirements, and they layer them on more and more every year. And so one of the key roles of being a school board member is to be an advocate for public education so that they can go to the State House and change some of these things that are tying their hands maybe at the local level to accomplish some of the wonderful things that the panel has pointed out that need to occur. A lot of that needs to change at another level before changes can occur.
Thank you. Great. Well, Reverend Manning, I think as a pastor, you have a unique perspective to add to the next question, which is school board elections are nonpartisan. However, endorsements by political parties and advocacy groups are becoming more and more common in these elections. How do you think the voting public should deal with these endorsements?
Yeah, not a challenging question for a pastor, right? And I think realistically, again, I know we are apolitical and not partisan in all these other aspects. We have to be very cognizant. We have to be very much aware, and I will say aware that one, you're going to have people who are going to try to put forth their particular agenda. That's just unfortunately one of the nastiness at times of human nature. We are going to push what we think is the solution. And realistically, I think going back to Ms. Vaughn's comment earlier on, when we do that, we then begin to cut other people who are whose history is equally as important out of the picture. So they carry a particular agenda, then you have to be mindful about that. And then when if they are endorsed by a certain party or a certain group of people, when they become elected, then they're going to be beholden to that group. And automatically, based upon what we've already articulated, they are not going to be willing to learn from each other. They're not going to be willing to serve the greater good. That's going to become a problem. So we need to be very much aware of who is endorsing whom. And I can't tell anyone who to vote for, what to do, but be very leery of that, because realistically, what we've already articulated, they will serve that small contingent, that small group. And we all agree that school board members must be willing to learn, must be willing to serve, and must be willing to grow. So we have to be very much aware of who is endorsing who in those particular scenarios. My time is up. I could have gone on for a lot longer.
Ms. Vaughn, would you like to respond?
I would just echo what Pastor Manning said. Unfortunately, I remember I started my first teaching job in 1994. And school board elections were nonpartisan, but that is not the case now. And so for the general public, I think it's really important that you do your homework. And unfortunately, sometimes the information is not as accessible as it used to be. One of the things we're thinking about is putting out in our region a guide for voters, because we need to know who contributed to the campaign. We need to know who and what groups that the school board members are even having conversations with. We had a school board member that had a closed door conversation with a group that was considered a hate group. And so I think it is really, really important that we do our homework, especially for this upcoming election.
Thank you. Dr. Schwalbe?
I'm sitting here remembering when I was toying with the idea of running for school board, there was a radio show host who was encouraging people to start at the school board level, because those were the easy seats to grab, right? Easy. You're right. You're living right there in the community. These are people's children. All you had to do was convince them that you like kids, and you could get in. And I'm now at a point, as I think back about those times and experiencing this firsthand, the group of activists who literally choose to come in and create the school board in their own image, right, as a group. And so it totally goes against my all-inclusive English classroom again. It does not pass the smell test. I did not have that opportunity as a teacher to ignore. And to me, it is very scary. And I would just say to individuals out there who are not in the field of education, you know who you can trust already in public offices in your communities, and do what I did. Go ask them for 5 minutes and talk to them about who they trust. I was already an educator, but I knew enough about what Scott Price just talked about, how you have to have this bigger picture with all of the state and federal regulations. I look back now, and whoever that was that suggested I go meet with our county supervisor and the local delegation, I thank goodness they entertained me for 15 minutes, but I learned right away how to gauge what was really going on in the county in ways that I'd never imagined. And that's the only way I lasted for 8 years, to be honest, is staying engaged with people I could trust, and they knew they could trust me.
Thank you, Dr. Schwalbe. I'm going to see if Mr. Price has anything, and then we'll get back to you, Reverend Manning.
And I would just again echo what the other panelists have said. I mean, look behind the endorsements that are out there. You might be surprised. It might even scare you a little bit. And you know, education is not a partisan issue. And in South Carolina, I mentioned earlier, we have 73 school boards, 73 districts, and only 2 of those boards are partisan elections, have partisan elections. There was a move this past year to add another board legislatively through a local law, which was something that we opposed as an association. We were able to keep that from happening, but there have been bills filed at the State House in the past 2 or 3 sessions to have all partisan elections for school boards. And nationally, most school, the vast majority of school boards nationally are nonpartisan. And from an association standpoint, we feel like that partisan elections have no place. School board elections, I mean, really, if you want to take a look at the dysfunction that you see in Washington, the increasing dysfunction that you're seeing at the State House, is that what we want for our school boards that are overseeing the education of our children? I don't think so.
Thank you. Reverend Manning?
Yeah, I just want to quick going back to Mr. Price, maybe asking a question, because maybe this is on the minds of several others who are listening. But how could we, I don't use the term lobby, but I'll use the term lobby, to encourage change so that those who are running have the responsibility to legally show where their money is coming from? Is that something that can be done?
Mr. Price, would you like to respond?
Yeah, I think the Supreme Court probably had something to say about that a few years ago, the U.S. Supreme Court, about how some of the dark money that's out there doesn't need to be reported. But there are ethics laws in South Carolina that require you have to file your statement as a candidate, and as an elected official, you have to file a statement of economic interest, and you also have to file statements with the Ethics Commission that show where you're getting contributions from. So and again, that's always a fun thing to do when you have a little time on your hands, is go look up some of the your elected officials and see where they're getting the money. But you can find that out on the Ethics Commission website.
Thank you. Ms. Vaughn?
Just one more thing. I do want to circle back to what Dr. Schwalbe said about service and our school. Like, if I'm looking at a person who's running for election, I'm going to see if they've been proximate to the issue before this. So have I seen them in the community? Have I seen them at school board meetings? Have I seen them in any kind of service capacity? Because that also helps me understand, and I'm going to have a conversation with them also, but I want somebody who is proximate to the issues, who already knows what's going on, and it isn't bringing some agenda into the room.
Thank you. Right. Dr. Schwalbe, I'm going to ask you, the most important job of the school board is the selection and retention of a highly qualified chief executive, and in this case, a superintendent. 3 of our 4 districts have seen significant turnover in this position. How can school boards and board members bring more stability to these districts?
Yeah, so I mentioned stability earlier because, again, serving on a board at a time when the superintendent had been in place for, I believe, 12, 14 years. And then during my 8 years, I believe we had 4 different superintendents, all for very different reasons, I would say, that those positions did not last for them. I believe the politics were ramping up. I believe I saw more personal, hurtful attacks than I could have ever imagined. In the quiet place in my home with my family, I would utter things like, who on earth would want that job? I know now, looking back, that there were many things we could have done as a board to pull together for those individuals, especially if we had gone back to what makes businesses successful. And that is looking at individual strengths and shoring those up and highlighting those and supporting them in those strengths. Also looking at those areas where there may have been gaps and assisting them to help fill those gaps, circle people around them that that could bring the expertise they needed. It's critical. In every school district that I've worked in South Carolina and still work with, I see how important that superintendent voice is to those teachers and principals. If that level of trust exists, if they're really working on that, it's okay if they're not perfect. We know that there are going to be missteps. There may be mistakes. And in general, people want to see our superintendent succeed. Unfortunately, we have to figure out how to stop this social media madness where we eat individuals alive for sport. It hurts my heart. I know that my 4 grandchildren are not directly impacted by that in terms of the day-to-day, but ultimately they have been impacted because their principals and teachers are. And so I don't have the answers for that. I do think there are some very important things going on in our state right now in terms of, we talked about teachers a little earlier in the teacher working conditions survey that was conducted, I guess, a year and a half or so ago. There are there's real work going on right now to work with superintendents and their teams around their own data in their districts. So it's not just a matter of teachers completing these surveys and it just, goes away with all the other data. We're now in a position in South Carolina, and I'm talking about scteacher.org, where we can go in and click on our little corner of the state and see what teachers are saying about what's going on in their schools. Our superintendents need support, real support in what's going on right under their noses in terms of retaining their teachers in the classroom, which leads to that stability. And so we have tools. And I think that in itself will help us hold on to our superintendents who, quite frankly, need more support than criticism. That's my professional opinion on that.
Thank you. And before I call on other panelists, I just want to remind the audience that you can type in questions to the chat box that will be read. So if you have a question for any or all of the panelists, please, I encourage you to please do that. Ms. Vaughn, would you like to respond next regarding how to bring more stability to the school districts?
Sure. I would just say that the leaders set the tone, meaning your school board leaders set the tone, and ultimately the superintendent sets the tone for the district. And where I've seen huge number of turnover is when our school boards don't know and understand their roles. And so they end up micromanaging or stepping in and doing things that they just really have no business doing. And so I would just go back to when we think about like the qualities of a school board member. A school board member has got to understand that they are managing a highly qualified individual who has spent years in school. A superintendent has most likely a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, a doctorate degree, and has to be certified to be a superintendent in the state. And so you're not, I think, part of the challenge is that a lot of times our school board members may not have even managed a person. And so to understand how to adequately manage and support a person is really imperative in this role. And, thinking about what kind of boss you would want. Because the way I see some of our school board members behaving, they would not want to be the kind of bosses that they are being, right? And so I think it starts with knowing your role and acting in that role and understanding, as has been said, that they are there to support the leader in achieving the district's goals. They are there to reduce barriers so that the leader and the school board member staff or the school staff can accomplish goals in schools, in central office, so that all children can achieve at high levels.
Thank you. Reverend Manning.
Yeah, I would again concur with what everyone has said and then add just a couple of things. One, going back to what Dr. Schwabe had said, be mindful of social media, right? Social media, people can just launch massive character assassinations and not blink an eye about it. And that's a problem that we would have to figure out, whatever type of school board member we would elect would have to understand the possibilities therein, and then do have enough insight to drill down to see exactly what is possibly going on. Secondly, again, going back to Dr. Vaughn's point, or Ms. Vaughn's point as well, the other aspect is making sure that that the school board knows their role. They have hired this particular person who has who's gone through all of the education, who has done everything else, who is indeed certified. So let him or her do their role. Let them do their job. Give them enough leeway that they stand in need of to be successful, and then follow, if there's a vacancy, follow your repeatable process. Don't change the rules midstream just to accommodate a few folks who is on a board. We must be, and again, this comes back to the whole aspect of working together, learning together, and making sure that we are always doing the best job possible for our children.
Thank you. Mr. Price, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, I would just like to say that, the superintendent and the school board are the educational team for the district, and I emphasize the word team. There's got to be trust. There's got to be a reasonable understanding from each what their role is and what the expectation is of the other. The board sets the goals for the district, the vision for the district. Superintendent carries that out and has input on that development, but carries that out. And the board has the responsibility to make sure there is a clear communication, clear vision, clear policies, again, that are carried out by the administration and the superintendent, and hold that individual accountable through the evaluation system that they have in place, the annual evaluation. And that's the correct way to do it. We as an organization, one of the primary trainings that we do all over the state and continually is roles and responsibilities. All of the stuff that we talk to boards about and superintendents about is spelled out clearly in local board policy manuals. Anybody who's running for a school board, I would encourage you first to take some time to look through the policy manuals, and particularly Section B of the policy manual that covers school board governance and the responsibilities, because it's all set right out there in black and white and it's for anybody to see. And we should really encourage you to look at that.
Thank you. Well, if nobody else on the panel has anything else to add, I'm going to read a question we have from the audience. Okay. And this is not addressed to anyone in particular. So if you want to raise your hand as to who would like to respond first, I'll be glad to call on you. How do you suggest we change the narrative in leadership and get younger qualified leaders in seats?
That's actually a problem that our organization, along with Movement 400, is attempting to address over this last year and moving forward. Because if we don't have a pipeline of candidates, which we would consider quality, that have the mindset of working on behalf of all children, we're going to continue to do the same things over and over again. So we've looked at a couple of national organizations. There's an organization that's called School Board Partners, who have worked with a couple of our school board members, and really just trying to be critical thought partners with them about how to create a talent pipeline for school board members in the region. I think that it is a challenge because people watch the school board meetings. And just like Dr. Schwabe said, they're like, I'm not trying to do this, because some of our local school board meetings last 5-6 hours. One of our local school boards most recently got out of their meeting at 10:30 at night, and they started at 5 o'clock, right? And so to do this work is servant work. And there are people who will do it. We have been in the process of attempting to help identify candidates. So there are people who are willing, but there is a need, right, to create the pipeline so that we don't continue to repeat the same mistakes of the past.
Thank you. Reverend Manning?
Yeah, pardon me, and just piggybacking on Ms. Vaughn as well, I think realistically, if you're going to have a substantial pipeline of young people, they must be willing to serve, they must be engaged, they must go through the hard work of ensuring that they understand the process. One of the things I think we would do ourselves an immense disservice is putting people into these positions who realistically are not prepared yet for it, right? And don't get me wrong, I'm a strong advocate for engaging younger people and helping them get to where they want to get to. But at the same token, they have to be willing to learn and understand the process, and then know that it's not going to come easy. And I think that's something that across multiple platforms and multiple job areas that we work in, that a lot of times people think that it's going to come easy. We need to make sure that we're preparing them. And as we prepare them, we need to make sure that we are equipping them to be successful and to be part of the solution again. So I think there's just a wide range of things that we need to be mindful of. I would always encourage young people to get involved, to learn the process, to grow. And then what Mr. Price said as well, reading, which I learned today, the whole aspect of the school board manual, and I will read it just so that I can have a deeper understanding and a deeper appreciation, because it's all about learning. It's all about making sure that we're able to do the best thing. I really love those signs.
I appreciate how well you respond to them as well. Very nice. Thank you. Mr. Price, would you like to add anything?
Well, I think Pastor Manning really said it well. I think there is a lot to be said for longevity, because on school boards, because there is so much that needs to be understood and learned, and it changes every year. It modifies every year. The state in the past 2 years has been completely overhauling the funding formula. And they're doing it through a temporary proviso every year. So it's something that you've got to have the background to be able to deal with that and understand that. Having said that, I think that as Ms. Vaughn was saying, it is important that we sort of plow the road a little bit for future leaders. And having students who are at every school board meeting, having them to see the work of the board and the important work that they do, that goes well beyond, just the board recognition, which is after which most of the students leave. But I do think it's important to have, to make sure that we are preparing our young folks for future leadership.
Thank you. And I know Dr. Schwalbe, we're ready to say something before, so please chime in.
Well, everyone's pretty much touched on this. I think organizations like the very one sponsoring this event could help prepare some of our younger people who are interested in running for school board by simply helping them demystify. With Scott Price's assistance, I know he doesn't need me giving him more work to do, but I do believe we would have more young people who are not turned off right away if they could simply see what all of us see in that initial training that is required by the state. Now, I wish there had been more trainings that were required the longer I served. However, I did have the opportunity to visit some communities and other states where there was a more proactive outreach, and there was more preparation involved, so that these young people know where to focus this energy. Otherwise, it is sucked up by the fire hose of information that starts coming their way, whether they like it or not. So educating beforehand, wonderful thing.
Thank you. As someone who works with a lot of local other government elected boards like councils, I love this next question from the audience. What should transparency look like for school boards? What role does executive session play in board meetings? Mr. Price, would you like to start with that one?
I'll dive right in on that. I think that public participation and a sharing of information between board, the district, and the parents and the public is very important. Hearing from the public is very important. The issue of executive session, there's nothing in the Freedom of Information Act that requires that a board or an elected body go into executive session. However, it does offer certain things that can be discussed in executive session, things that are of a personnel nature, things that are related to contractual matters, things that are related to the purchase of property. There are very legitimate reasons for elected bodies to go into executive session. But what's very important about that is the things that you discuss within executive session. And there's a reason for that. The things that you discuss in executive session, you need to maintain that confidentiality that attaches to that. There could be any number of issues of liability that could attach to making that information available. So, executive sessions are a valid tool that boards have to be able to sometimes talk about things that relate to student matters, personnel matters that don't need to be in the public eye, but it shouldn't be abused either.
Thank you. Others like to add to that? Reverend Manning?
Again, just articulating quickly what Mr. Price has said, it shouldn't be abused, right? Executive session should not be an abused process. It shouldn't be one that you kind of just, so we're going to go into executive session and realistically, you're just going there to hide something, right? That is, again, I would imagine somewhere in the manual, Robert Rules of Order gives you various reasons on why you would go into executive session. So we need to be cognizant of that. Executive session should not be misused, should not be misrepresented. It should be a place realistically where you are discussing certain personnel matters, that you have a sense, a level of trust and confidentiality that we as a board are having that discussion, meaningful discussion, so that everyone can feel free to express their own thought processes, right? But it should never be abused. It should never be one that you kind of just say, we're going to executive session to just silence, those who are in the school board meeting who are listening. You just shouldn't do that. And that's something that we have to be very cognizant of. And we need to be aware that unfortunately from time to time, again, coming back to my first comment, our human nature at times is to hide certain things, especially when we are curtailing or bowing down to those who have paid money for us to get into those positions. I have to be very mindful about that. Before you hold up the sign, I have stopped.
Thank you. I love a fellow rule follower. I'm the same way. So anyone like to add anything else? Okay, I'm going to ask one last question. And if we only have about 5 minutes left before we do our wrap up. And so I'm going to ask if we could, hopefully each of the panelists will have something to say to that, but maybe limiting our remarks to 1 minute each would be great. But, the election deadline to file for running for school board is coming up in August. And I would like to ask each one of you, what would you say to encourage people to run for school board? A second to think about it. And Ms. Vaughn, would you like to start?
You would have me start with the unscripted question.
Sorry. You're so good on your feet, so.
I would just say connect with your purpose, because we've talked about this before. It is servant work. It is thankless work. There are long hours. You might get a stipend, but you're not getting paid for your time, actually. And so, I would encourage and, have been having conversations with people who could be potential candidates because of the work that they've done in the community, because of, or the ability to make a greater impact, because I know that they're walking in their purpose and their callings. And so I would just say to anyone who is considering running, if you are willing to fight for all children, to have access to a high quality education, high quality teachers that look like them, and you're not wedded to a particular agenda, you're open-minded, you're willing to listen, collaborate, then throw your hat in the ring, but be willing to talk to the community, be vetted by the community, understand what the community wants and needs. And especially, children, having conversations with children, having conversations with families, having conversations with educators, so that you can really dig down and know what the real issues are.
See, that was great. You've almost convinced me to run. So, Dr. Schwalbe, would you like to respond? Give your 1-minute pitch of why somebody should run or encourage people to run?
Sure. I mean, I'm happy to say that as late as last week, someone contacted me, a friend of a friend of a friend, who just wanted someone who would listen and let them bounce some ideas around. I would say there is help. There are professionals all around us who will help you. You are not in this alone. While that seat may feel sort of hot, and that light on you may feel hot on occasion, there is help. And there is nothing more important in our communities than our children. Every single one of them. They do not all have what some of us had growing up. Just go to the store, go shopping, and take a look at babies and middle schoolers and teenagers who are trying to make sense of this world. If you want to give back to your community, and you can, even if you didn't have a great education experience yourself, you can make a difference. It's small things, small shifts. You do not have to cure all the ills. You can't anyway, and there is help. So that would be my response to that one for sure.
Thank you very much. Mr. Price, would you like to give your pitch?
I would, and I'll incorporate again what the others have said so very eloquently. Just make sure that you're running for school board for the right reasons. And as the others have noted, the focus needs to be on student achievement and all the students in the school district. Make sure you're willing to do your homework before school board meetings. Make sure you're willing to be a listener, not only to your fellow school board members and the administration, but as well as the parents and the students that are out there. Understand that you are not on a mission to fix something, that you're going to be part of a team that has a common goal and a common purpose, and you can be a part of establishing those goals and purposes, but you got to be willing to be on the team in order to do that. Make sure that you are willing to support community involvement in school. It's so important that the community be a part of our public education system. And you have to stoke that fire from time to time. And so I would just encourage somebody who's looking to run, and maybe go watch pretty much every school board meeting is live streamed in South Carolina now. And spend a little time watching not only the Tri-County area, but some of the other boards that are online, and it can be very, very interesting and very eye-opening experience. These folks work hard, and as Letitia pointed out, they don't do it for the money, but it's almost a voluntary position, and a lot of hours, a lot of time, a lot of heart and soul goes into being a school board member. So make sure again that you're willing to do that and do it for the right reasons.
Thank you. I always think it's good practice to let a pastor have the last word. So, Reverend Manning.
Yeah, fascinating. Thank you. So I'm going to sum it up in the traditional pastoral message. I'm going to give you 3 points, right? Being willing to serve and prepare for service. That's 1. Seek wisdom from others. That's 2. And 3rd, being willing to learn and to listen.
Fantastic. Thank you. I would now like to thank everybody for attending and bring in Paula Eggleston, who is the president of the Charleston League of Women Voters and our host this evening. Thank you all very much.
Okay, thank you, Kendra. The League of Women Voters, we serve not only Charleston, but we serve Berkeley and Dorchester counties, and we feel that's critically important as far as our message. We also, as far as John Reed and Lynn Pagliaro from Charleston Forum, we thank you for being a part of this event tonight, our panelists, our moderator. I learned quite a bit, and I've been in the field of education for over 40 years. So I am bowled over by how articulate our panelists were and our moderator and the suggestions that they provided. Do want to remind you about the League's Vote 411, where you can get more information about candidates, not only locally, but nationally and statewide. That's found on our website, League of Women Voters of the Charleston area, and our candidate forums that will be coming up as well. What we like to do with every type of event such as this is think about our next steps. It doesn't stop right here as far as what we've discussed tonight. So what's next? What's next in preparation for our school board elections in the fall? I want to leave you with that. And you can certainly call us regarding voter education and voting, and Vote 411 will give you lots of information about your districts and your candidates. But Board of Elections in Berkeley County, Charleston County, Dorchester County are your go-to governmental bodies for answering questions as well. And we have the Charleston County runoff election, June 25th, for Republican Sheriff Greg Kitchens and Carl Ritchie. And remember that Election Day is November 5th. So thank you all, and I appreciate you all being a part of this event tonight. Good night.